Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Tobi Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we talk about personal development, professional development, and some philosophical topics. We pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. And today we have another great topic that I hope is going to inspire people. How are you doing today, Tobi?
I'm doing good. Yeah. Getting to the end of March, spring is here. Yeah, no, things are good. Happy,
Awesome.
happy to be here.
Great. So did you have any afterthoughts? We had our last conversation was about intention.
Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts about that?
Actually, not so much thoughts, but a lot of actions, I would say. Continually, consciously working on intention setting, and I don't. It might be days when I don't do it and I don't set a clear intention, but it's such an easy thing to do, and most of the days I think it really makes a difference. I come back to when I'm doing something and I come back to oh, what is my intention here? What should I focus a little bit more on? And it supports me in going in the direction that I want to for the day. And if it's about being proactive or being a better listener or just staying positive or whatever it might be for that day. But I think it's really helpful. And me and my, as I said last time, me and my son, we play around with it. So we have some fun and we talk about it. So yeah,
No,
and
that's
it's good to have that bouncing board as well.
absolutely. I think it's great for you to be able to, if you're teaching things to your son, it helps anchor it in you, right? So
Oh
having
yeah.
someone to work on that with. Actually, maybe I'll ask my girlfriend if she wants to get in the habit of we can talk about intentions regularly.
Mm.
Yeah, I was thinking about intentions both in a practical sense and it kind of led into the topic we're going to talk about today. But I think that I wondered how many people are actually clear on what their intentions are in any given situation or in their current lives. They'll have bigger goals, but I think about things like I think back to when I was really bad in relationships, and you're almost you see yourself building up to an argument with someone, and if I had stopped to go, what's my intention here? What am I trying to achieve here? And then because after the fact you regret things you say or whatever,
Mm.
and why did I do that? Why did I? And I think asking yourself what's my intention? So what am I trying to get at here? Is a really helpful thing as you find yourself moving in moving in direction you're not sure of. But I think for me having the longer term intentions are really easy for me.
Mm.
I've got a lot of clarity on my vision and the things I want to achieve. But I'm a bit of a free spirit. I like to be a little bit free flowing. I don't like too many constraints, and so
Mm.
it's almost like doing that on a daily basis. I know it's a mental block, right? I know this isn't the case, but it almost sometimes feels like, do I have to set an intention today? I just want to let it all flow. And
Yeah.
so it's just making that mental adjustment because I do know that when I do have a really clear intention for this is how my day is going to unfold, I think
Mm.
having intentionality is
Mm.
really, really helpful.
Yeah.
So maybe it's a matter of splitting it up. If I'm going to have a creative day where I want to do, even there, right? The intention for me to set a block of time and write is super important. So, yeah.
Mm. But I think, I mean, for me that can be a great intention to just go with the flow. Today
Mm,
I'm just my intention is to go with the flow and do what I want to do. Do what my intuition tells me to do or whatever. I think that's a great intention. Yeah. I
mm.
mean, maybe not every day, but for some days that's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. If your life is too planned and too rigid, and it doesn't allow for a degree of openness to see new opportunities, I guess that is a really good intention. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it can work. I mean, it's all depending on context, right? But
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So, and so I think today's topic. So it's my turn to pick a topic, and today's topic for me kind of really follows up on the intention one because as I said, I don't know if a lot of people are really clear on what their intentions are. And so today I'd really like to talk about clarity, because, if there's one thing that most people come for coaching on, it's to find clarity, whether it's, I know where I want to get to and I'm not clear how to get there, or I'm really not clear on what I want, and just finding a path through things, or finding some real clarity on, what my priorities should be, or what I want to be doing, and so on. So I think today I'd really like to talk about some things we can do to find more clarity, and how important it is, before you take action, to have a clarity on not only where you're trying to get to, but also what your first step is, and things like prioritization and so on. So yeah, what are your views on clarity? Do you have some good approaches to be more clear on what you like, and what your priorities are, and what you want to be doing?
Well, I have to say, your introduction triggered a few thoughts, and
Good. Let's hope it did that for everybody.
yeah, let's. I don't know where this is going to take us, but yeah, I mean, so when we're talking about clarity, first of all, I guess we can't be clear all the time. We can't have clarity all the time, right? And that's the part of this that makes it interesting, and that's the thing that makes life interesting as well. We don't know what's going to happen all the time. We cannot know where we're going all the time. We can't foresee the challenges and changes that are going to affect us in different ways. So I guess we're starting off immediately with a philosophical angle here. So, what is that search? What is that search for clarity? How much effort are you willing to spend on something that you cannot have sustainably? Right? That's it's a bit of a balance. When you gain clarity, it's a great emotion, I reckon. Like when you have this moment of clarity, is that okay? Now, great! I finally know what to do. I know what's important to know. I know how to prioritize things. But it's not sustainable, right? You can't have that clarity forever. But so that search for clarity, how much effort do we want to invest in that? But then, of course, we can discuss some of the techniques that makes us get to clarity. But I think it's important to maybe understand from the beginning that this is not we're not talking about nirvana here, where you
No.
where you have sustainable clarity or whatever.
No, we're not gurus teaching enlightenment. What I think there are a number of, again, as you said, it depends on context, and there's clarity of intention, there's clarity of what you want, clarity of what actions to take. There are just so many areas where it helps to be clear, and then it's kind of like when you can be really focused, when you're clear, you can really be focused and zoom in. But sometimes it's helpful just to step back and reflect, and especially in times when there's not enough clarity, right? So there are moments for it. I think there are, it's recognizing when clarity is important, and clarity is always important when you're looking to take an action. And I think the place that I'd like to start today is, we live in we all are creatures of habit. So, we get into these routines, and sometimes it can feel like a rut. Sometimes our routines are great. And I think it's, when you're doing things out of routine and you no longer know why you're doing them, why, and you're not even clear on whether they're helpful or good for you, right? So when I have people who come to me for coaching because they kind of feel stuck and they are unhappy in their life, they'll come to me with things that essentially boil down to, look, I've checked all the boxes in my life. I've done all the things that society said I should be doing to be successful, and why am I still not happy, right? And so that's obviously someone that's searching for some clarity on either where did I take a wrong turn, and so we follow these prescriptions for life, or we follow these habits that we've built up, We wonder why we continue to come to these outcomes that we're not happy with. And so, going back and reflecting and finding some clarity on what choices am I making where, that aren't leading me to outcomes that I'm not happy with. So I think those are all areas. And a lot of times it comes down to, well, we're doing things unconsciously because they are habits. And we started a habit sometimes not because we were clear on where we wanted to get to. We started a habit just because we continued to do something that came easy, that was what everybody else was doing. And we didn't have the clarity before we started taking those actions. And once we kept repeating those actions or those thoughts, it became a habit. And we're still not even sure why we do it. So I think, getting some clarity around how the unconscious actions that you take, bringing them to the surface, making you aware of them, and making sure they're aligned with what you're trying to achieve in life, right?
Yeah. Yeah, when you're speaking, it also makes me realize that we have a tendency perhaps to search for clarity in the future. So if I just have that or know this, then I'm going to be clear. But I mean, I can't say 100%, but I would say that a majority of the time, all we need is right in front of us, right? So all we need to be clear and it's right in front of us, and to start with that clarity. How can I utilize the situation that I'm in, the resources that I have, the things that I appreciate? How can I utilize that to gain clarity of not what I want in the future, but where I am right now? And it really struck me when you said stepping back, that it's so much what it's about, at least for me, in different situations, in different ways. When you're stuck with a problem, and you're digging your head in and trying to solve it, and you feel like you get stuck. But then when you have that moment of clarity, we can step back and say, oh, this is what I'm trying to achieve, or this is what's important. It's such a great, it's I don't know if it's problem solving or what it is, but it's a great feeling to gain that sense of clarity, I guess.
Absolutely. And presence is something that I really wanted to talk about today, because we don't spend enough time in the present. And, most of our thoughts are in the past or the future. And you're right. A lot of people, when they are trying to get clarity, they're trying to guess at what's going to happen next. They're looking in their crystal ball. They're trying to imagine what a future will be like. And it never turns out exactly the way, it almost never turns out exactly the way you had anticipated. So, but I think when you look at, we talked last time, when we were talking about intention, I talked about the GROW model of coaching, which is one that I try to use when helping leaders, coach their, people in their team. And so there I was focused on sort of the way forward. But when you look at the first two steps of that model, there's the goal, right? So you get clear on where you want to go. So that's just finding direction. And I always, I try to explain to people that, sometimes people have a hard time committing to, well, what if that's the wrong thing, So I don't want to set that as a goal. And I just try to explain to people that it's having direction is important to give you some momentum, to get you motivated, because most people, if they're going to get into a boat or they're going to fly a plane, they're going to chart a course, right? And that's a good from the starting point, it just gives them a direction. And then so if you're sailing a boat and you have a port of call that you're trying to get to, there's no reason you can on the journey there decide, actually, there's a storm ahead, or there's actually I want to do something different, and you change course, right? So I think getting some clarity on where you want to go based on your current information and where you are in life is totally fine, and then changing that direction is fine also, as long as you're not constantly changing course, but you're not so committed that you can't have course corrections. But then the second step of that coaching model is, the reality. So what's the current situation? And I think that's probably one of the most important things, is to understand where am I right now?
Mm.
We can be clear all we want about the future, but if we're not clear on where we are right now and what we need in this moment, right? I think that's something a lot of people overlook.
Mm. Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, and I find that a lot of people, I mean, say in situations where we're practicing coaching, and if we're using that model, which is kind of a standard, I guess.
Yeah,
A typical problem is that you go through, you set the objectives, so you go through the goal, and then fine, that's good, and then we continue, but we don't spend any time on really clarifying that goal. So for me, that can be the coaching hour, or the whole, almost the whole session, to understand, and connecting it to the reality, as you're saying, so why is this important to you, what kind of options do you have, and really digging into that in itself is a great clarifying process, I think, if you do, but you really have to dig there, right, to
yeah,
to look at it
absolutely.
from different kind of perspectives, and from emotional, from rational perspectives, and understanding, what's important here. And then when you get into options and will or whatever, that kind of goes by itself.
Mm.
But I think, at least for me, the real sort of the real dirt, or not the real dirt, but the juice kind of thing is in the goal, and the reality there, to really understand, why is this important to me,
Yeah,
what's happening here, how does that relate to my long-term goals, what makes me happy, etc., right?
yeah, and I guess in the spirit of clarity for anybody listening who didn't listen to our last session or doesn't has never heard of the GROW model, it's just basically a 4-step coaching process where you start with it grows the acronym, so you start with the goal. And then you look at the current reality, that's the R. Then you look at options, and then you look at what will you do, or what's the way forward. So I totally agree with you. I think that first step, when I'm teaching people how to use the model, if they're in a leadership role or in the mentoring or whatever, um, when I observe, like if I'm giving a workshop on this, if I observe people going through the steps, the first one is sometimes the one they move on from way too quickly.
Mm. Mm.
Someone will go, this is what I want. Okay, great. Well, where are you now? And then they'll spend a ton of time looking at the different options. But it's so funny because when I have people come to me for coaching, and they come to me because they have a goal and they want some help getting there. There are so many times when through the process it turns out, actually, I'm not that clear on my goal, or actually I don't know if that's what I want. And the reason they haven't been pursuing that goal is because they're not that motivated, because it's not really what they want. It's not aligned with their values. It's not aligned with the things that they're passionate about. They're doing it because they should, or they have to, or it's more obligation than it is passion. And so I think that's where you're absolutely right. In this present moment, sure, taking the time to dig in and get clear about where you're going and why. And this is the whole Simon Sinek thing, which I believe in a lot, and I preach to people, and it's finding your why, right? And so finding your why is another part of that process of finding clarity, right? So if anyone hasn't read Simon Sinek's book, Finding Your Why, highly recommend it. He's also got a TED Talk, and he has the model of the golden circle, where he talks about companies that a lot of people know, they know what to do. Most people know what to do. So almost everybody. Some people know how they do it. So for some people, it's just luck, but some people know how they do it. And then in the very center of the circle is the why. And the least of the people understand why they're doing what they're doing. And if you don't know the why, then it's no surprise if you're not always motivated, or it's no surprise if you're going after goals that really aren't in line with your values. So So I think part of the process of clarity is finding, our very first podcast we did was on purpose,
Mm.
and I think the why is such an important part in the whole clarity process. So yeah.
Yeah, and as we said, I mean, when you get into tasks and details, and you start creating habits and things start going by routine, yeah, you get a little bit lost in the woods, and you forget, yeah, the direction or the purpose when I'm going, and then of course it's difficult to have clarity about among things. So, yeah, but having a really clear idea of what is the goal, what is the purpose, why is this important to me? How can I contribute to this? How can this, I don't know, make my life better, or other lives better? And as soon as you can relate back to that, then okay, that in itself is the perhaps the best way to gain clarity, at least for me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the purpose. So when you're talking about the goal, so what you're trying to do in the future, and you're trying to get clarity, I think really the place to start is finding your why, and then making sure that it's even within your ability to achieve. We talk about SMART objectives in the workplace. So, one of them is it has to be achievable. So I think there's a lot of tools that help you get clarity in terms of that. But then when you're looking at, the whole presence piece, which I think you started with was, how do you get clarity on excuse me, where you are right now in life. And so I think the other thing to do to help get clarity is to do some measurements, or finding ways to sort of assess and measure where you are, so that it's a good motivational tool to 3 months down the line look back and see how far you've come, and that helps you continue. But also, just to take stock of, is this the most important thing for me right now? And sometimes people will be trying to do step 3 and 4 before they've taken step 1. So we've talked before. One of the tools that I'd like to use, I try and start every, like, depending on the issue someone's come to me with, but for kind of general coaching on getting clarity, I like to start with the Wheel of Life. And so for anyone who hasn't heard of the Wheel of Life, you can search for it online, but it's basically you create a circle, you kind of pick, I try and keep people to sort of 8 topics, or between 6 and 8, but you basically divide up your life, or the things you want to measure into these 8 categories. And so the circle, you divide it up into these equal pies, and then the very center is can't get any worse. The outside, the 10 is so you go from 0 to 10 is the scaling. The 0 is in the middle. The 10 is on the outside rim of the circle, and basically, the 10 is can't get any better. 0 is can't get any worse. And then so you measure, and I find there obviously it's very subjective and it's in the moment. So, but I haven't found a better way to measure the current status of anything, and so I've even used that model in business applications with people, where it's like, okay, here are all the areas or all the components of a project, and where we've gotten to, and measuring them. I think it has multiple applications, but certainly for individuals to kind of get a sense of where you are, how you're feeling about life right now, because I mean, at the end of the day, it's that this is what we're trying to find: more satisfaction, happiness, a sense of success. So they're all visceral. They're all very emotional based, and so I think finding a way to measure where you're at is a big step to finding clarity about the present moment. I've talked about how important meditation is, and being in the moment. And I think just we talked about, the taking a step back, not being so focused. If you're so hyper focused and you're super clear about your goal, it's absolutely important to sometimes take a step back and take stock, have a look around, smell the flowers. That is also another form of clarity, right? So on your, taking stock of where you are right now at any point in your journey in life, or in your journey of trying to achieve a goal, is also important, just to make sure you're still up to the task, make sure you're still feeling good about the direction you're going.
Mm.
All of those things help to find more clarity, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just a simple, such a simple process like doing a check-in
Mm.
that we do in well in coaching or in workshops or in trainings. Just having a moment to think. First of all, think about, reflect on how are you actually feeling right now, and to that then articulate that and put that into words and share that with a group of people that you're going to be working together for the day or for the hour maybe or whatever it is. It's a great little process for yourself to gain clarity, but also to understand and touching base on what we talked about before, to empathize with others, to understand, okay, to gain some clarity about how other people are feeling and why people are behaving in certain ways, etc. There's subtle or small little tools like that you can utilize as well.
Yeah, I mean, just think about in Scrum, right? So when people in the workplace use this Scrum process, where you have these a project and you have these various iterations, but you always have the stand-ups, right? So the people come back together, they go out and they try things, and they come back with these proposals, and then they have a stand-up, and it's a really good moment of, okay, this is where we are. These are the ideas we currently have. This is what's worth discussing, and I think. There's applications. All of these things are steps to find more clarity, right? And so you can do the same for yourself. I mean, sure, that's the the workplace application, but for yourself, finding, sometimes it helps to articulate, or it helps to write it down. So I think I don't journal daily, but I have had there's a I'm drawing a blank on the book. I recommend it to so many people. It's about becoming more creative. But one of the first exercises is morning pages, doing journaling in the morning, right? And so for 30 days, the artist's way. That's the one. Thank you very much. I'm worried about my my mental capacity. I keep drawing blanks. I think this is the thing. We talked before we got on about how the last 2 years of not so much travel, and that's made less time pressure, and that's made me less sharp. And I feel like my brain hasn't been as challenged, and therefore I'm drawing a lot of blanks. Anyway, off topic, but yeah, the some way of getting your thoughts and feelings out, whether it's on paper or I mentioned Scrum, but you can get together with a friend or a group of friends and talk about your ideas or how you're feeling or where you're at, and get have people reflect stuff back to you. I because I love to write, I'm in a writers group here in Hamburg, and I've mentioned them a few times, and sometimes what's really helpful is writing is a very individual, solitary thing, and it's hard to get a good assessment, and so I will we'll each bring something to the meeting, when we meet up as a group, and we'll read and we'll get feedback, and it's a great way to get some external feedback and that in itself can be a process of gaining more clarity, right? So how do you process feedback? How much feedback do you want to get, and then do you taking the time to process that feedback is also a really important step in the process of getting clarity.
Yeah, for sure. If now you're opening the idea of how gaining some clarity of how you're perceived by others as well, right? And if we look at for instance, if we look at the Johari window, how much do we share ourselves, so we are we're opening that arena so other people see or a larger portion of ourselves, and to be able to gain some clarity about that hidden area. So what do other people see in me that I don't know? That's another perspective on clarity that I haven't really thought about actually, but yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's it's really opening that idea about the perception among others of ourselves, and how do we and we were talking a lot about how we reflect, spending time on reflecting on our actions and our feelings, and in that sense, kind of intro perspective.
Mm.
But then the clarity can also be about gaining a better understanding of how you're viewed from the outside, and that can be a little bit of a, yeah, daunting exercise, I guess. It's how much are you willing to share? Can you accept what other people are seeing in you? And that's a little bit more difficult, as you were saying, to do on your own. Now we're talking about an exercise where you might need to need to invite other people and get multiple perspectives on things, right?
Yeah, it's especially good for people like me who have a very well-developed, active inner critic. And the narrative that you're telling yourself, or the voice in your head, is often, it, it's very subjective. So it's not always going to give you the best opinion of the where things are at, or the work that you're doing, and so on. And so if you really want to get clarity, that's why the coaching process is so great. You've got a neutral person to talk to. I mean, I'm not trying to promote us as coaches, but I go to coaching as well once in a while, because I really believe in the process. And so, your friends aren't always the best people to get, because they want to support you, and they want to tell you what you, some of them will want to tell you what they think you want to hear. But I think finding different sources in order to gain more clarity about, when we're talking about trying to figure out where am I now, and what am I still missing? And sometimes it's not easy to figure that out on your own. And then getting multiple inputs. And this is something I think is super important when you're trying to decipher today's media landscape. Because, if you're reading all of your news from one source, or you're listening to one person's opinion, you're going to have a very one-sided view of the world. And there are plenty of people with opinions out there now, and there's plenty of access. And so I think it's just helpful to get different takes, different perspectives. Otherwise, you start to live in this bubble. And I find that with digital media, it's also a problem, because people get into these echo chambers where people just keep confirming, each other's opinions. And so you're not going to get any clarity on that, whether it's clarity on current events, clarity on, the economic future. If you're feeling really down about things, if you keep listening to negative opinions, that's not going to give you more clarity. It's not going to help you make better decisions. So yeah, I think looking at a variety of inputs and feedbacks in order to get the clearest picture possible is, that's just another element of trying to find clarity.
So proactively seeking multiple perspectives on things, and I mean, we in the modern landscape we talk so much about diversity and inclusion. I guess that's a really positive aspect of that. To
Absolutely
try to get into the diverse perspectives on things, and understand things from different people's opinions, and try to have discussions with different types of different personalities, or people, or interest groups, or whatever. Yeah.
I think that's
when we talk about leadership development. One of the tools that are frequently used is a 360 assessment, right? And it's really about this to gain this feedback about yourself in the context of being a leader, to create some more clarity and understanding of how you're perceived, and what are your strengths, and utilize that, and also create some awareness about what are your development areas, or things where you might need to pay some attention to, or manage a little bit more closely to be a more effective leader. That can be a very daunting task, and there is some debate about how useful this can be. So I mean, if you're using these kind of 360s, I think it's really important to have a really clear understanding of how it should be utilized, and how it should be debriefed, etc. So it's nothing to do just on the fly, I would say. But that's only one way to gain these perspectives. It's a very practical kind of tool. But just if you're creating that kind of trust in the group, where you can have conversations around this in a one-to-way format, I mean, I think it's much more trust building and genuine, etc.
Yeah, I think the 360 approach only works if you've got a high level of trust, and people which leads to people being free to, to be critical or to voice their honest opinion. I think that's really important. But there's some noise in the background. It's not here.
Oh, is it background for me? Okay.
Okay,
Uh,
no
Let
worries.
me. Okay. I have my earphones on. I will check into that. Just give me.
Okay, we had a little environmental disturbance there, but we're back on. Yeah, sorry for the interruption. Yeah, so I think we were talking about the whole if you're going to do a 360, but I think the getting so in the workplace, yeah, if there's a lot of if you and this can be true for people, individuals, and this whole point of talking to your friends, and having enough trust for them to be willing to give you honest feedback, right? And so whether it's the workplace or privately, so that's the thing to be considered when you're getting feedback to help you get more clarity. But I think and the whole process of getting multiple sources of information is one that's very systemic. And I believe in systemic thinking, systemic principles, and so much of that is about getting different perspectives, right? So we talked about focus. We talked, you can zoom in. We talked about stepping back and getting taking the holistic view of things, and then really being able to look at things from different angles, from different perspectives, is really important way of getting clarity. And I think that's why I'm such a big fan of the systemic approach to things. So yeah, I think that is a really important step in the whole process of finding clarity. And then another one that I think, people, especially as you get older in life, you think you've got yourself figured out, yourself. And so now it's just a matter of, what things do I want to change, or what things do I want to improve, and where do I want to get to? And when people come to me for coaching, they, as I say, they talk about how do I achieve this goal, or how do I figure out what I want? But nobody ever, or I don't think I've ever had anybody come to me and say, I'm trying to figure out who I am. And I think a lot of people do that sort of as they're younger, and they'll, go on a trip to find themselves or whatever. And sometimes people will do that in a midlife crisis, but I haven't actually in my coaching experience had someone come to me and say, look, I'm trying to figure out who I am. You might have people go, I'm trying to figure myself out a bit, but I think that's a really important piece of clarity to figure out, and recognize that you exist on multiple levels. So there's a systemic, emotionally, we're one big multitude of systems, right? So obviously you've got your physical systems, your nervous system, your immune system, and all that stuff. But we've also got an emotional system, and this is what a lot of the systemic in psychology, comes from, and just understanding that you have different elements in your personality and different needs. I talked about the inner critic, there's the inner judge, people will talk about the inner child, but there are all these kind of systems emotionally that understanding what the needs are and what the wants are. And so when you have a clear understanding of, who am I, and that includes, what are my values, getting really clear on that, understanding, the different things out of your past that have created sort of the habits that that guide you through life. I think all of those things are important to understanding who you are. And then when you're really clear on who you are, understanding what you want becomes a lot easier, right? And also it's when it's that one of the big questions about when you're setting a goal, when you're figuring out, when you're saying this is what I want, well, who wants that, or why do you understanding why you want that, right? So there's this, ever since I was a child, or I could never do this when I was younger, and so now I want to realize this, or understanding what the motivation is behind it, and that's a big part of the whole clarity process as well, right? So,
Mm.
so understanding yourself on multiple levels, understanding your motivations, understanding, because sometimes we want things that aren't good for us, and they are driven out of fear, or they're driven out of something we didn't get in our past. And I don't want to get too deeply into the psychology, because obviously I'm not a trained psychologist. And so, but I think those are important things to reflect on,
Mm.
and get clarity on, in order, when we figure ourselves out, when we get a lot more clarity on who we are and what our values are and what's important to us on a very deep level,
Mm.
it becomes much better to get clarity on what we really want
Mm.
externally, and what actions we want to take, and what kind of relationships we want to have, what kind of work we want to do, what kind of environment we want to live in. I think, looking within is a good place to start, to
Mm.
find clarity for the rest of everything else in your life.
Yeah. Something that might be, it might be a counter perspective to what you're saying, but essentially I think we're going in the same direction. But maybe it's different angle to it. So I was very influenced by a conversation I had with the training participant last week, and he was saying he was a very philosophical individual, and he was talking about how we as humans, we have a tendency to make everything everything that is complex, we try to make as complicated as we can, enabling us to try to understand everything, right? So making things really really complicated, but the task when we get successful is when we think that we can manage it and we think that we can understand it, right? So we're forcing ourselves into this position. And his take on this, and he's an engineer, so he's trained in this way. But his take on this now is just like, I've got this all wrong. It's all about simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about simplicity, and it really. I mean, when you're talking about the experiences that you've had, and also when I'm thinking about what's going on in the world and looking at the last few years, how it's extremely complex it is, and that we, of course, we lose clarity in these kind of situations. But so boiling this down, of course, if we're looking at systemic principles to try to understand and look from different perspectives, but when it really comes down to what we're trying to boiling this down to, is it to make as things as simple as possible for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that's what this is about in terms of clarity of uh, making. I mean, even though if the context that as we started talking about, even if the world is extremely complex and it's really diffuse and we cannot comprehend everything, it's not possible. Life is like that. But if we in this situation can create a little bit of simplicity for ourselves and gaining that perspective that now I know what I want to focus on, and finding that, if you call it intention or that one thing, it's a sense of, I don't know if it's peace or if it's you can call it clarity, but this maybe that's what it's about, to finding that simplicity in the complexity of things.
Yeah, I think you're right. We do have a tendency to overcomplicate things, and obviously, the more you can simplify things, the clearer the clearer it gets. And I think it's this is where we get into the topic of complicated versus complex.
Mm.
And when you have complicated situations or complicated problems to solve, the reductionist approach can be really good. You can break it down to its simplest parts, and then the way forward becomes easier to clarify.
Mm.
When you're dealing with complex situations where there are a lot of variables, a lot of moving parts, as there are with human relationships, humans are fickle and they're unpredictable at times.
Mm.
Then it becomes a little bit more difficult. So but I think you're right there. If you get down to the fundamentals, and this is why when I talk about, with whether it's with leaders or individuals, about creating a personal philosophy, and a personal belief system,
Mm.
I do try and help them sort of establish a foundation. So these are the fundamental core beliefs that I want to build the rest of my philosophy on. And I think so when you have that, you can break it down to its simplest terms. And when you have that, it becomes very clear on, like I say, that this is, I've spent more than 20 years developing my personal philosophy, and it continues to evolve. But one of the questions that I ask myself when I have a big decision to make or I'm facing a challenge, I'll sometimes even aloud, I'll say, what does my philosophy tell me about this? And then the answers do come clear, and it does simplify things because I've already got this framework from which to make decisions and live my life. So obviously getting clarity, and here's another area to gain clarity on, what are my beliefs? What do I believe in? And, obviously there's, you can be opening a real can of worms, but there are some very fundamental beliefs you have. And we talked about this before when we talked about beliefs. So you've got your values, which are much deeper than your beliefs, and more malleable. Your beliefs are obviously more changeable. But I think getting really clear, I talked about one of the things about knowing yourself, getting clear on your values. Then there's the getting clear on your beliefs. So what's your, how you see the world? What's your mental framework around this? I think getting some really clear ideas on the beliefs that you have and which ones support you and which ones stand in your way. That's another area to find clarity on that really will help clear a path through a lot of the self-inflicted problems and stresses that you have in your life. So when to take it back to your example from the participant in your workshop that you had, an engineer will be very reductionist because from an engineering standpoint, I think you have these very clear rules and you can break things down that way. I think that's where I'd sort of recommend a little caution in the reductionist approach to things. It's very applicable to complicated, and to complex, it's a little, it won't necessarily help you find the clear path through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I think we're saying kind of the same thing. That brings it back to the systemic principles that are kind of going in two directions at the same time, and that can be helpful. So maybe this is counterproductive to gain clarity, but in the end of the day, it's actually about that, finding that simplicity in a very complex environment. But I like the way that you kind of brought in basically every other topic that we've been talking about in our series of conversations. But it's just setting these building stones or the foundation for, if you call it your life philosophy or leadership philosophy or the way that you want to live your life, that itself is a very clarity gaining exercise, right? Yep. When you are clear about what's important to you, about your values, about your beliefs, your intentions, etc., all of these things, it's much easier to make decisions in this complex situation. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the simplicity. If you're clear about your boundaries or that foundation, it's so much easier to have the clarity of what's right and wrong, and what do you want to focus on, what do you want to prioritize, how do you want to act and behave in certain situations. And this is really easy to talk about, but when we're behaving as humans in this in this global context, it's not always that easy, of course.
No, and I think that the answer or the way there always seems simple once you've got clarity. once you've figured out the answer, the puzzle was never that complicated, but or maybe it was, but I think in hindsight, there's always a lot of clarity, right? So and so I think that's I think there are times when you can break things down to their smallest parts, and the simplicity of that works. But I think there are so many people who want they want to have the easy answer. They want to have, just give me the process, let me do it, and then let me get through. And so that they'll take the same approach to health. Just give me the pill, or give me the thing that's gonna. I don't want to have to sort it out. I don't want to have to. And sometimes it's a process to gain clarity. Sometimes you need to put in the work, and sometimes it's going to take more time than you thought, because with experience, with taking the right amount of time, you'll achieve clarity. I think about in life how much clearer you are about things now than when you were 20 years old or when you were 15. That you just, sometimes life experience will make things clearer for you. So I think there's wanting to have that magic pill that's going to give you all the clarity, I think is not a helpful expectation to have. So so I think trying to always be, as you said, I think that was a really good point you made, where there's times where you need real clarity, and then there's times where it's all right to just to be exploring and to be open and to be vague. So I think understanding when the right time is, and obviously when you're going to make a big decision or when you're going to take action, those are times for clarity. And then when you're trying to be curious and explore and gain new experiences, then there's just an openness, and you don't necessarily need as much clarity. And so recognizing the right moment for that. But I think whenever you're trying to make a decision and figure your way out, and I think the other thing is, you don't have to have it all figured out. This whole thing about there are these people who will know from a very young age what they want to do with the rest of their life, and that's admirable. And the level of focus they have and the level of clarity is amazing. But that may be the clarity they have in their career, right? Or some people will be really clear that on something like, I want to be a parent. I want to be a mother or father, and I've always wanted that since I was little. And so they'll be really clear on the relationship or their family status that they're going for. We all have things in our life that I think most people will have some things that they're really clear on, but I don't think you can expect to have that same clarity in all areas of your life, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I mean, the word that pops into mind there is doubt. And that, doubt is a normal part of life, right? All of us will have to, how do we handle doubt? And that's the opposite of clarity, that we will have doubt. Is this working? Is this the right thing to do? Is this making me happy? Is this worth it? Do I believe in God? Do I doubt God? These kind of things. Whew. It's but that's also part of it. How do we deal with that? How to live that out? We can't be living in doubt all the time, but we can't be living in 100% clarity all the time either. There's a balance there that we have to manage.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing to accept, is that, well, there are no guarantees in life, and there's very little certainty. There's very little truth that we can know absolutely. And so I think that's a really important thing to accept and acknowledge as you're seeking clarity, certainly for the big questions in life. But, for people just wanting to be very practical about, finding clarity, sure, there's lots of things that you can do. It just depends on how big the question is that you're trying to answer, right? Yeah. And there's just some things you're never going to get absolute clarity on. The questions you just related to on, theological questions, those are, and this is the great thing about philosophy and philosophers, for thousands of years working and reworking these ideas, and we're all working towards a little bit more clarity.
Yeah. And one example that I really personally enjoy in this, when you're having a coaching conversation, and you're asking questions and you get the answer, well, I don't know, yeah, I don't know all the time, which is a normal saying. We all say, I don't know all the time. But then, okay, so just focusing on, so what do you know? And just focusing on that part. Okay, well, I don't know a lot, but I know this. Okay, and that itself is just focusing on what is clarity for me. What can I utilize? What can I utilize as a building stone to move forward in some way? And just in this environment of doubt, finding that part of clarity and build on that. I think that's a really enjoyable process, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect coaching question. Is, well, what do you know?
Mm,
We focus so much on what we don't have, what we don't know, and at the end of the day, the more when you know what you don't want, the what you do want does get clear, right? The more
mm,
experiences you have, and the more things you can go, okay, well, I tried that, didn't like it. I tried that, didn't like it, and the more you'll start to be able to narrow down and get clarity. So I think that's the whole process of life experience, and that's why it's so helpful. And so I think the people who are looking for easy answers on clarity are they're not going to be fulfilled, because you're not going to find the authentic answers you're looking for. I think certainly there are situations and things where we've solved problems in life. We've solved mathematical problems. We've come up with new ways of doing things, and maybe those will continue to improve. And so there are things that can be easy to be clear on. There are some easy choices to make, but then there are more difficult ones. And I think recognizing that it's a finding clarity is a process,
mm,
and so there are some tools that will apply to more specific things, and more and less, and reducing complicated things to their simplest parts to find clarity. And then there are other situations where it's a bit of trial and error, and there's this whole systemic process of zooming in and out and getting different perspectives, and having some degree of flexibility and willingness to change course when needed, when new information arises, right?
mm. Yeah. Um, my mind was wandering off until to another part of this, but maybe that's too big of a thing. Actually, it's about the idea of transformation, and how that can be clarifying in itself. But maybe that's another topic, actually.
Absolutely. I think we're constantly in this process of transformation, hopefully. Otherwise it's stagnation, and there are plenty of people that are stuck in their habits and stagnated. And if you get too limiting in life and you get too rigid, it's going to limit your experiences. But if that's what you want and you're clear about it, I'm not here to judge anybody. So
Yeah.
good. Look, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. And hopefully that was helpful. I know we went off on a few tangents, and we kind of made the topic bigger
But it
than.
was really enjoyable. Yeah. How did we end up there?
Yeah.
It really took directions that I didn't foresee.
I think I'd maybe like to recap for people who've managed to listen all the way through. But if you're looking for some clarity in the day to day, I think that sort of the grow coaching model we mentioned before is really good. Starting to get some clarity on where do you get some direction. So figuring out where you want to get to, or based on your current information, where you think you want to get to. Taking stock of where you are, so finding a way to measure, and being present, and what your current reality is, and then clarifying where your options are. What are the different possibilities you can have, and really thinking outside of the box. And this is where a coach is helpful. So I think all of those things are great for finding clarity. Doing some measurements, being reflective, and then the other piece is really knowing who you are, what your values are, what's important to you, and I think all of those things, if you can look at those different areas, and I include getting to know yourself, understanding your beliefs and your philosophy, I think all of those things will help you get more clarity in specific situations. As you said, we can use a reductionist approach for things that are complicated, but complex things, you need a bit of a different approach. So anyway, I think hopefully those are kind of the inputs that you've found in our conversation today. Is there anything else you want to leave people with? Last thoughts on how to get more clear, finding more clarity?
Well, I mean, maybe just emphasize a few things. We've been talking about how different techniques you can utilize to gain more clarity. Well, I think I really want to emphasize this, that we can't have clarity all the time.
No.
But when it comes to, I mean, sometimes it's very simple decisions, and just looking inside, I think very often we know what is right, and just trusting yourself to make that right decision, that is clarity. So I just want to end on, and I think I started there as well, that I think that most of the time we have everything we need right here, and that's clarity, and the answer is within you, but just taking the time to honestly look for it and make that decision, that's all the clarity you need.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's the point that I didn't articulate very well before. That when using that reductionist approach, clearing out the clutter will help you get more clarity for sure. So if you've got all of these, asking yourself, like, prioritizing what are the most important things I want to thinking about, and obviously the less things you have to consider, the easier it is to find clarity. So clearing out a lot of the clutter will make things a lot clearer as well. So I think that's a really great point to kind of wrap up on. So, all right, Tobi, thanks for another great conversation. I hope it's been. I know for you and I, these are always great. I hope they're interesting to listen to, because these are topics that we're really passionate about. So obviously for us, they're interesting, and they spark ideas and foster our own clarity. But I hope for those listening, it's done a bit of the same, and it's inspired you to sort of think about ways you can get more clarity in your life in terms of your intentions and your, what you believe in and what your values are, and where you're going to start in terms of making the decisions and the choices and taking actions in your life. So I hope that's been helpful for everyone. We'll leave it there for today. We'll come back with another interesting topic. You're up next, Tobi, and we'll see you all next time. Talk to you all next time. All right. Until then, be well. Take care.
Take care.
Talk to you soon.